welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness professionals and medical professionals. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 54, I'm joined by Rosi Reeves. Rosi is a fitness professional that blends, as she'll talk about, fitness, food, and faith together. Now, I know when you heard that last F, some of you may have taken a step back in your seat a little bit. So this is going to be a discussion that talks about the infusion of those three, but primarily the faith of the religion component. And before some of you that are non-believers turn this off, first off, this is not going to be a religious discussion to a great extent. This is going to be a discussion around how there are many different on-ramps to a physically active lifestyle for individuals that aren't as physically active as what we'd like them to be. And given the number of people in the world that are believers and people of faith, this could be a very viable on-ramp. So I'd ask that you listen to this conversation, as I'll mention in the beginning, with an open mind. And if you are a believer, then this might give you some ideas of how to infuse faith with fitness. If you're not a believer, it may allow you to think a little bit more broadly about other on-ramps to help people become more physically active and just overall healthier. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 54. Please enjoy this conversation with Rosi Reeves. We're delighted to be joined by Rosi Reeves. Rosi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. And I'm excited for this conversation. This is going to be a slightly different conversation for Wellness Paradox listeners. Rosi and I connected at a recent NSCA state conference, and just another piece of advocacy for why you should go to these events and network. Rosi and I had a delightful conversation coming off of that event, and we talked about what she's doing. And I thought it was a really, really neat thing to talk about in the Wellness Paradox. So you never know what going to those conferences and investing a little bit of time and a little bit of money will do for you. So Rosi, it's great that we've been able to connect here. We're going to have a very interesting discussion today around how we use faith and religion as a potential on-ramp for physical activity and exercise. And before we get into you telling us a little bit about your story, I want to say for those of you that might be averse to religion or faith, and maybe that's not your belief set, I still think this is a valuable conversation to listen to. One, because just getting other people's perspective, I think, is important. But two, I think the fact of the matter is there are many on-ramps to a more physically active lifestyle. And this is one on-ramp that Rosi's using very effectively and hopefully looking to proliferate. So I'd ask that you just listen to this conversation with an open mind, and maybe you'll learn some different ideas about how you could incorporate your own unique on-ramp to physical activity for the people you work with. So with that as the preamble, Rosi, I want to turn the spotlight on you and say first, tell us a little bit more about you and your background, just to provide some context for our conversation.
Yeah, that would be great. So I have been active and moving for as far back as I can remember. Being physically active was always something that kind of lit a fire in me. And even before I can remember, family has stories. So fast forward through life of soccer and, all kinds of sports you can imagine. I went to school. And I started as an engineer, and 3 years in, I decided to change my major to physical education because I like to work out was the reason I changed. And I ended up getting a degree in physical education, and I was a teacher for 8 years in kindergarten through high school and grades, a few years at each different level. I ended at high school where I was coaching varsity soccer. I was also teaching health there at that time, as well as physical education. After having my daughter, I decided I wanted to kind of stay home more, which led me to pursuing a personal training certificate, which led me to the CSCS through National Strength and Conditioning Association. And it kind of snowballed from there. I did some group classes and always just wanting to educate people on physical activity and the joy of it and why we do it. And then from there, I ended up in Detroit, Michigan, where I took a job as a trainer and a wellness director, had some time there. And then the world decided to spin a different way. And in that spin of a different way, I was baptized when I was 14. And I would say that my being an active, going to church and all of that, being really led in faith, reading the Bible and touching in with God wasn't a real super active part of my life, maybe until about around the time we moved to Michigan. So maybe about 7 years ago. But when COVID happened, it was kind of my safety net. Like so many people, you kind of felt like you were in this free fall, and the Lord and sitting down with him every day was my safety net. And in a stretch of time, I was sitting in my backyard, and he asked me to leave my job that I was at. That to me was my absolute dream job. I have a million posts on loving this job. And he asked me to come home and teach health and wellness through faith at home. And I got up and went inside and told my husband that I was going to leave my job and do this other stuff, which I don't know, it's a bit shocking to everyone, even to me. But it was important for me I had been asking him to send me wherever he needed me to go. And this is where he put me.
Yeah, the pandemic was such an interesting inflection point for so many people's lives. And, ultimately, I think it seemed to lead people down a better path or a worse path. And, fortunately, you've taken this better path. And let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about this business that you started in amongst all the craziness of the pandemic after, being spoken to.
Right. So my business is Fit Living, and it's fit with 2 T's, which follows the frequency, intensity, time, and type principle that I learned about in school that I kind of carry with me in kind of all aspects of health, the frequency and intensity, time, and type in which we devote to different areas of growth. So Fit Living is the business, and then it's about fitness, food, and faith. So my life really started with fitness and into health. My passion was there. It evolved to include nutrition because I figured if I was going to work my body a certain way, I might as well fuel it better. And so the evolution of food came into play. And then when COVID and fitness came, or the faith aspect came in, because it really solidified everything I'm doing in my heart for health. It really, I became so aware of my call. Like, this is what God put me here to do. And through this business, I get to share it. I do online classes where I teach in the mornings. I'm in Michigan, so it's on Eastern time. We teach in the morning time. It's about 45 minutes, and we have a message in the morning, a prayer, and we go through class: strength, mobility, flexibility, body weight. Sometimes we use weights, all sorts of different approaches to fitness in that class. I do some programming, about 3 programming units a year. So I get a group of people together and we go through whatever the subject might be. I just finished one up on Easter Sunday. We did a kind of a mental health study, and working together, there's always a little bit of fitness, a little bit of food, and a little bit of faith in every program. And then I do some one-on-one coaching online, in person, personal training at home, really just all kinds of, just kind of dabbling in the world of health. What I love so much about what I do is there's so many different ways we can touch lives. And the COVID blessing, I try to keep a list of COVID blessings handy at all times. The access to more people now that, having to go virtual in so many ways, that we can reach so many more people. So it's really nice to be able to do that from home.
Yeah, absolutely. And the common thread through all of this is the is the faith-based component, which is something that we'll dive into more as we get into this conversation. One thing I am struck by as we're sitting here talking is that when you look at well-being more broadly, not just the physical well-being realm that we typically think about with regard to fitness and physical activity, a big element of that is spirituality. When you look at the well-being wheel, so to speak, part of that is financial well-being, vocational well-being, physical well-being, but part of it is spiritual well-being. So it strikes me that prior to maybe this endeavor, you were just focusing on the physical well-being, but now you've kind of broadened out to incorporate the spiritual well-being. Was that an intentional thing when you were thinking about well-being more broadly, or is that just something that is a consequence of you really wanting to incorporate faith into this?
So I've always, examined wellness, that whole wheel of wellness and wanting to be a part of everything. I guess, bringing faith into my fitness, right? That's what we're asking, how faith kind of got into it, right? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be more active, involved in my church, to be honest. It kind of started there. And we have these life groups. And I decided to join a life group because they were doing a fitness focused life group. And so that felt really comfortable to me. And so I joined that, and we read through the study. And as we're reading through the study, I started to realize how I could connect my faith to, I could pull it into my wheelhouse essentially, and elevate my growth in that area within my wheelhouse, in a comfortable space, in a safe space. And by lifting that side of my life, these other two areas, kind of food and fitness, started to elevate as well. So where I started growing here, it started lifting everything else up. And it just seemed like it was the right thing to do. It felt like I was in the right place. Does that make sense? You've ever felt like when you kind of entered into something like, this is where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah, that's a powerful feeling. And it's interesting how all of those things came together for you with that common thread. Before we get into some of the broader conversation and questions around how you have incorporated faith into this, I'm curious, with your business model, what are you finding is the mix of services you're providing? Is it equal thirds between those three things that you talked about, personal training, your programs, and your virtual classes, or is it skewed a little bit more towards one than the other? I mean, I always like to take a pulse of what's happening out there with the frontline fitness professionals to see what is really happening in our industry now as we emerge from COVID.
I'd say I do have quite a few at-home clients. So clients I go and visit at their homes. I haven't been in a gym in almost 2 years, but that is going to be changing soon. And I'm really excited about that. Another connection from our conference, another reason to go to conferences. So I'll be getting into a gym soon. But the classes, I would say probably my classes and my at-home do the best. The online programming and coaching, that one's not maybe as many people doing that. I think the constant engagement, right? The stuff where you're either face to face or they're showing up. Sometimes the do it on your own is harder, right? When it's not something, when we have a coach, it's nice to be there with them some kind of way in person. So that one's a little bit less, but so impactful. So and I like kind of the smaller numbers because I really get to know the people. I know their stories. We spend one-on-one time together, and I really get to learn about the people, which is a huge part in helping people to advance in their health or any area of growth, really knowing their story.
Yeah. And I think we're all craving that personal connection, in the same place. There's something about that energy that you just can't replace no matter how hard we try over Zoom.
Correct. Yes, this is true.
Now let's start talking about how you actually construct this, because this is where I'm intensely curious. I revealed to you in our last conversation, I was raised Catholic, and so to whatever extent you're taught the Bible in 12 years of Catholic school and paying attention at that age, I learned the Bible at some point in my life. But I'm curious how you're using faith as this foundational on-ramp to get people doing things that relate to a more physically active and healthy lifestyle. So kind of take us under the hood a little bit in this discussion so we can understand how this actually works.
Okay, so I started with a new client that last week, and we followed up to yesterday. So I'll kind of take you through what my process was
Perfect.
with her, and this is kind of how I approach a lot of the people I see. And she's one-on-one online, so she lives in another state, and we work together virtually. So the first thing I like to do is let's chat. What is it about your life that you feel like needs to change? Why do you feel like it needs to change? What's making you feel that way? I think kind of knowing backstory, getting to know you, letting them get to know me, ask me questions as well. Just kind of knowing where we're at, knowing where they're at in life and where they're wanting to go. And then part of that identifying, so that's going to identify a lot of the physical needs. What do I want to do physically? How do I want to change? And then examining kind of schedules. So it's little bite-sized chunks. I don't necessarily dive people right into the Bible out of the gate, but we talk about schedules, what we're doing kind of with our time, and then that's based on their goals, right? So how we're going to then structure some of the new activities in their life. And then based on a lot of their goals and then how they've prioritized those, I ask them to start journaling from the Bible. So using a Bible app, you can, if you know the Bible really well, people know specific stories they can go through, but I kind of like doing a search tool either in a Bible app or the web or on a website, sorry, and have them search words that remind them of healthy, like strength or health, whatever, like words that come to mind when they think of somebody who's strong, endurance, perseverance, kind of starting to brainstorm those health words and looking them up in the Bible, and then reading through some of those scriptures. So it's journal time, if it's 10 minutes a day or 5 minutes, or getting a Bible app, getting a scripture of the day, maybe reading a story from there, even if introducing yourself to it. And then as they read through, so this one client yesterday was telling me she looked up strength, and she's going through and finding different scriptures that have to do with strength. And then she came through Proverbs 31, which talks about a noble wife. But within that, she mentioned a verse that talks about being clothed in strength and having no fear of the future is essentially what this said. And how that resonated with her was when she becomes strong, as she does this because she wants to be stronger physically and mentally and spiritually. And as she works on her exercise and her nutrition, she becomes stronger. She doesn't fear the future of her diabetes. She doesn't fear the future of not being able to do the things she wants to do, of not being the woman she wants to be. So that strength, like actual physical strength that she's going to get from exercise and working out, is going to make her future better. And she is a believer, but connecting that in a realm in which she's really comfortable. So I would say in faith years, she's much more experienced than I am, but by connecting that really deep spiritual side of herself that feels really good to health, it becomes bigger than you. Because when you understand, being a believer and sacrificing your life for the betterment of the world, right? And you can do that by connecting with scripture and like in that way, right? So I kind of took what was her wheelhouse. That's kind of why I think using it as an on-ramp, like you were talking about, like picking an on-ramp for someone's wheelhouse. If it's a business person, maybe it's a business through the eyes of business or finances. But I'm using this wheelhouse of mine and introducing it to people in a way that connects to something they're already comfortable with.
Yeah, that's an incredibly interesting story. And you said it as I was thinking it makes for a much more powerful motivation to succeed. It seems like, and I've worked in fitness for 23 years now, and the vast majority of people come to you with the goal of, hey, I want to lose weight, or I want to get fit, or I want to tone up. And people give up on that goal all the time. It's a very, transactional and surface level goal. But when people can attach that more superficial goal to something that's a little bit deeper, they tend to persist when things get a little bit more difficult. And I'm curious for you to compare your experience as a fitness professional before implementing the faith-based framework compared to after, and just, can you speak to at all the difference in conviction and persistence people have to work towards their goals using the faith-based framework versus maybe a non-faith-based framework?
So I think one of the hardest things with any faith-based activity that you're doing, right? We all know that religion is this kind of taboo subject, right? We don't want to bring it up. And I avoided that for so long because you never know what it's going to do, how people might respond or react if you bring it up. And about it was before COVID, maybe a year or two, I started mentioning little tidbits with my clients of faith comments of maybe something I was doing, or if I knew that they, went to church, or, oh, what did you guys talk about? Just kind of bringing it up subtly in conversation to see what kind of a response I would get. And I mean, shockingly to me, and this is because I chose not to bring it up, so many of them were positive, responded really positively to it and really enjoyed the conversation. And I felt like, and when you probably know, anyone who has trained with anyone or has trained anyone, there's an idle time, right? There's time for conversation and connection. And I think as I started having conversations like that more and more with my clients, it built a different connection between the two of us, which I felt like led to, more motivated kind of workouts where they were coming in with a different frame of mind, when they know like that it's a good conversation to have. People like having it. It's not just, oh, how's the weather, or, kind of digging into some personal things. And I think becoming closer that way brought something a little bit more out of them when they're exercising. And I feel that same way even with my classes. We deliver a message. People are free to chime in and talk, as we go through the class. It gives you, like you said, something, or like we discussed, something deeper to think about versus, kind of coming in, not that the outer reasons to get in shape are not valid or good reasons, but with anything, it's that deeper connection that brings a little bit more out of you than just showing up to the grind just because it's the grind. Using that time to honor the temple that God made you. I mean, which we are, every single one of us, that he designed, and just kind of honoring him for that and all the gifts that he's given us and the blessings he gives us within our calls, and how strong he makes us and gives us these able bodies to do wonderful things. And kind of thinking about that as they work out, it brings new life to the workouts and to the energy that they put into them, and into daily habits that we talk about as well.
Yeah, I love it being in service of something that's more deeply meaningful. And I'll also say what a courageous act on your part to start bringing it up, because I can only imagine, because it's religion and politics are kind of those taboo things that you don't want to start to have conversations about, particularly in a atypical context. Again, if you're in a church, if you're in City Hall, okay, maybe religion or politics makes sense, but on the workout floor. So there must have been something in your relationship with those clients, in your conversations, and your interpersonal ability that allowed you to read that would be an appropriate thing to bring up, because I can't imagine you brought it up to everyone. So just I'm going to ask you to touch on that, not from the faith-based perspective, but just from the interpersonal skills that great fitness professionals have. Like, unpack that a little bit. How did you know that it was safe to bring up, or did you, or you're just like, what, I'm going to do this and see what happens?
I think some of my clients, when I get to know my clients, when I first start with them, we talk again about, what do you do for a living? What do you do on the weekends? So I do kind of learn initially trying to gauge what their lifestyle activity level is,
Mm-hmm.
if they participate in activities, so whether or not that's a part of their life. And then with a lot of my clients, I had been with them for a couple of years before I started talking to anybody about it. So I really knew a lot of them really well, and it felt, again, safe to do that. I will say I talk more quickly about it to my clients now. I'm very open about it.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody seems to be really responsive. I'm sure it's been a while. I'm sure there might have been some clients that probably acknowledged the statement because they, respected me and we've been working together, and maybe that was kind of it. And if they stopped, then I would stop too. But I would just, bring it up any chance I get, because part of being a disciple for God is, Jesus didn't talk to everybody who believed and agreed with him. He approached people that, were nowhere close to that. And he not only did he approach them, he wanted to be with them. He wanted to sit with them. So I think braving the environment where somebody might not be interested. So I say something, they acknowledge it respectfully and don't push for more, so I can stop. But the next time I see them, I'm going to talk about it again. And it's not a pushy way. It might be something story I might tell relating to something that I did while they're resting or whatever, just casual conversation. It doesn't have to be pushy, but kind of acknowledging what that feels like when it's connected to that part of the fitness and the faith, kind of teaching them stuff that I'm learning through different Bible studies, because I focus, not all of, but a lot of my Bible studying on health.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you more about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has been absolutely devastating for the fitness industry, with upwards of 1/3 of our clubs closing nationally on a permanent basis. One of the few stabilizing forces during this very tumultuous period of time has been IHRSA, the Global Trade Association for the health and fitness industry. On my crusade to make fitness professionals part of our healthcare continuum, the work that IHRSA is doing is absolutely vital. They provide advocacy and lobbying support at both the federal and the state level. They support state alliances in many ways, and they also provide resources and best practices to club owners, operators, and individual fitness professionals. Indeed, if we are truly going to become part of the healthcare continuum, we must speak with one unified voice. We must have best practices that we implement, and we must come together as an industry to ensure the public, the medical community, and lawmakers hear our message loud and clear, that movement is medicine and it is essential. That is the work that IHRSA is doing. They've recently revamped their membership structure, allowing large clubs, small clubs, boutiques, and individual professionals to join the organization for an appropriate price that allows them to have access to all of these many great resources and allows us to unify and amplify our voice as an industry. For more information on the amazing work that IHRSA is doing, go to their website, IHRSA.org. That's IHRSA.org, IHRSA.org, to look in a little bit further into the work IHRSA is doing to unify our industry, to move us closer to being a part of that healthcare continuum. Now back to today's episode. That's great. And I think that the principle that I want to abstract for our listeners there is that you are reading the situation properly and you're figuring out, like any skillful communicator, how to get a point across that you think is important, but still have the other party be receptive to it. And that's another conversation for another podcast. But I think that obviously requires a lot of skill, particularly around more sensitive topics like religion. So I wish that I could have been a fly on the wall to watch how some of those interactions took place, because I suspect it requires a high degree of interpersonal communication skills to successfully navigate that.
Yeah, well, the first Bible study I did specifically around exercise, what it's called Faith-Infused training.
Mhm.
And that was pre-COVID. And that one really kind of opened the door for me to share, because as I would read things that connected to workout specifically, or mindset during an exercise, or all of that, I would start to sprinkle in sharing some of that with my clients. And a lot of that really opened doors, because then it was kind of an easy way. Oh, I read this about mindset and how we can use faith, and listen to this scripture, and how about, and the connection there. Isn't that kind of cool? And it just then stimulated conversation. But again, kind of bringing it into my wheelhouse made it more comfortable for me to talk about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. It's very, very, very neat to kind of listen to the evolution of your process. Now, that being said, I'm sure that there are some barriers and some challenges that are associated with this. And I want you to touch on those. But before you touch on those, one of the first questions that came to my mind is, do you work with clients that just come to you and say, hey, Rosi, I want to train with you. You seem like you're a great trainer. I'm not interested in the faith component, or is the table stakes for you people being willing to have faith be incorporated into this?
No, not at all. I
Okay.
mean, I want to work with anybody. My mission is to help people create a life of abundant health, and anybody who is ready for a little bit of that, I am happy to help and to be with. I wouldn't push that on them. I might mention it in passing, something I'm doing and how it relates, or but I think it's important to be soft with your approach, especially for people, for what you would call non-believers, right, that haven't kind of taken that leap of faith just yet. But I think continuing to share, even if it's through my own experience, it still exposes them. But I wouldn't ever tell someone no, that I exclusively work with people who want to do that. Mm-hmm.
Now, get into the barriers and the challenges a little bit. I'm always interested, because it's easy when you kind of do the norm, right? Like circuit training is so ubiquitous. We're from where I sit right now in Plymouth, Michigan, in my training facility. I feel like I can throw a football and hit 15 different circuit training facilities. You're not really stepping out on a limb by just doing circuit training, but to some extent, you are stepping out on quite a limb. And so I imagine there are barriers and there are challenges, just as there are rewards. But let's talk about those barriers and challenges, and maybe what you've done to overcome some of them.
So I think for me personally, some of the barrier, like one is, of course, being willing to talk about it. And you asked me if I would do this. I mean, I'm really nervous, and mostly just talking about it, but I'm also excited to be able to put the spotlight on God and to let Him do His work, and what this might do for anyone that's listening, and how this might encourage change in their life. So kind of just the barrier of being nervous initially. And then for me, I kind of mentioned maybe my faith age being a little bit young. Like I said, it wasn't really until COVID that I really dove into the Bible. I've never read the Bible cover to cover. I'm working on it. It's tough. There's a lot of words I can't pronounce for many, many lines, but so I would say that my faith age, kind of like anyone you meet new to the gym, their training age is, if it's young, they're still learning stuff. My faith age, I feel like, is kind of young. And sometimes I get myself caught up in that, like, well, I've only been reading the Bible a couple of years. I wonder if what I'm saying has any weight. But that's not, that's a lie, right? We know that's not true. I definitely, at any point in time, right? They say, if you run, you're a runner, right? If you're working on your faith, you're working on your faith, and God's going to kind of bring to us what we need. So that's, a barrier for me is making sure I'm studying. I want to make sure I'm always growing and learning new scripture, reading new studies, just kind of getting more well-versed in the Bible. And then for people, like you said, it's a kind of a taboo, and we live in a culture that really applauds open-mindedness, right? We're in this culture where we want to be open to any and all beliefs and ways of life sometimes. And I think anyone who feels that they've ever been, judged for who they are, right? Which is probably everybody would kind of feel the same way. It's sometimes it's not so open-minded and people aren't so willing to hear what you have to say and immediately want to turn that off in, either in a positive, neutral, or negative way. And and that's a big barrier, is finding out how you continue to push forward when you kind of get door closed after door closed, right? But that's a big part of that, is giving it to God and trusting that He's going to take me wherever I need to be and provide. But I still have to do the work of checking in and talking to people and finding new connections and new ways that I can keep spreading His word, because I don't know that people always actively seek it out. You have to let them know that you're there, and that can be scary to kind of, here I am.
Yeah. So it sounds like the biggest barrier that you really had to overcome here was just your own fear to a great extent.
Yeah, I think and it's funny because that's, faith over fear. That's kind of the whole driving force of faith, is not having to be scared anymore. And I think, it's interesting that that's been the biggest barrier. I've never been a fan of the stage or speaking, but if I'm going to put this out there, this new kind of, and I'm not the only person doing this. I know I follow some people that are wonderful that do this very same thing, but I think it's not very popular, and to step out on a stage that's not very popular can be really scary. So here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, here we go. And even you being here is quite a part of that. Yeah, and I bring a couple of questions into this for the close, which I think are really intriguing. The first question I want to ask you, and in fairness, I didn't send you this one ahead of time, so you can take a second to think about it. But what do you feel? And I'm going to use the word church here to be like the broad term encompassing, all religions and all faiths. The church is an institution in our world that a lot of people are very connected with. And I don't know the percentages of people that associate themselves as believers with any given faith, but they're a major institution on this planet. What role do they play in helping to enhance the physical health of their flock, so to speak? I mean, religions talk a lot about, your spiritual health and everything associated with that. But we know that, pastors and people that are in church environments are incredibly trusted resources, just like a physician would be. So would a pastor or somebody else in a faith-based setting. So what responsibility do you feel they have there? And then the follow-up question is, do they take that responsibility seriously and do anything about it?
Oh, what a great question. I really like that question. So one of the books I read was called Crave, and it talked a little bit about churches and their role in addressing health. And so I went to my pastor at my church and scheduled a meeting, and we discussed why health was not discussed within the church walls. And he gave me his answer. And I do believe church has a responsibility. I believe every part of the community has a responsibility. So I wouldn't say it's solely on the church, but I think absolutely, especially a community space where people gather and are learning and growing, I think you absolutely have a responsibility to that. We could get into all kinds of tangents on kind of where we've led ourselves as a society in terms of health, but I think the more people that are addressing that within their facilities where people gather, the better. Our churches doing it, that was the second part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our church did the one Bible. I can only speak for mine. Our church did the one Bible study, and there hasn't really been one. I've attempted some events, and I want to continue to attempt events that kind of bring people in for activity or learning about how to be healthy. I think one of the churches in our area has maybe a running club. So I do think, so many people, there's so many resources at church, so many people that do so many different things, and introducing, I think, even the opportunity, if it was a committee or if one person was able to kind of start a program up, what that would look like. But I do think churches have a responsibility. And I would love to know of any church programs that are going on that I could maybe bring to my church or add to a list of ideas that we could do. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I don't hear about it a lot. And, in all fairness, it's not like I have my ear to the ground in the faith community or anything like that, but you don't hear about it a lot. And I appreciate you saying you can only speak for, your particular church, but I feel like if it is going on, I think there is a great opportunity for it to go on more. And you said it, this is a community place where people gather for betterment of themselves, albeit spiritually, but betterment of themselves. So what a natural environment to also piggyback on, betterment of your physical self. And so I think it's interesting. And, if nothing else in this conversation, maybe people can hear, the opportunity that is there. And make no mistake about it, it is a opportunity to better people's health, to better their spiritual well-being, but it also represents a very interesting business opportunity as well. And one of the things that I always remind fitness professionals about, if you don't make money from what you're doing, you don't have a job, you have a hobby, and you're not going to be doing it for very long. And the fitness marketplace is so noisy and it's so crowded that if you can figure out a way to differentiate, and you certainly have with what you're doing, although it's scary, it also represents a very interesting business opportunity as well. So just throwing that out there, which kind of leads me into our second to last question, which is, if I'm a fitness professional and I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm going, man, I'm a believer, I have a strong faith base, I've never thought about actually connecting these two things. Rosi did it, so maybe I can do it. What would be your first pieces of advice for somebody who might be thinking that as they're listening to this?
Okay. Really quick, I want to hop back to that last, the church's involvement. Sorry.
Hop back.
There is, and I'm going to get the name of it because I'm blanking on the name right now, but my daughter did cheerleading. There's a youth sports organization out here where we are that is faith-based, and they do cheerleading, basketball, flag football. There might I said basketball already. There might be a couple others, but they do. It's at a church. Like outside, basketball is probably inside, but at halftime they do like a little devotional for the kids and they act out this stuff. So there is this faith-based, as children too. But I will get the name of that for you and share that with you as well. But that's kind of a cool thing that they're doing. So for fitness professionals that are, kind of like, hey, wait, this sounds like something I could do, I would really recommend that Faith-Infused Fitness, and I'll send that information to you too. I would say start there, because for me, having some of the background that I have in training, in my life of exercise, just kind of connecting with that book, it was such a seamless entry into a faith-based kind of health world. So I'd say that would be kind of one of my first recommendations. And then the other stuff is you read about it. Find Bible studies that go over it. I've done some nutritional books that have been written. A lot of my stuff is written kind of by women, maybe for women, but anyone could read it. I will admit, I'm a woman and I tend to kind of go through things that women go to. While I do train men, a lot of people that do my program are women, because that's kind of where my health, wheelhouse kind of lies best. But you can read I'm sure they would have for men, health for men books that are kind of faith-based. I say, like I had clients do, when you are searching scripture, to search keywords that are related to health and then read the context. That's the biggest thing for me right now, is to read the context of that scripture and kind of understand and see if it correlates and connects. Follow people that are doing the same thing online, follow their content, ask questions, get to know them. I've reached out to quite a few people on Instagram that are doing some of the same things, and we have great conversations, and I've become really good friends with some of them too, my Insta friends. And so, but it's nice because it's nice to have those people to talk to and to ask, hey, have you ever studied this, or what are you doing? Just kind of, again, networking, knowing people that are doing what you're doing, so you can because we can't do it all.
Yes.
Right. So to continue to spread the word.
Yes. And I would venture to say, fundamentally speaking, based on what we said earlier, also be able to embrace whatever fear comes from, taking this leap of faith in this area of your life.
Yes. Yeah. That was, that's the most important thing, is to step out of your fear and discuss it, because there are more people out there that want to discuss it than you probably think. And whether that means they're a believer, maybe they're curious, maybe they do have an open mind and they want to learn more. You just never know. I've had more positive responses when I've brought it up than negative, like overwhelmingly more positive. So don't be afraid to talk about it at all.
Awesome. Well, Rosi, where can people go if they want to find out more about you and what you're doing?
So I'm on Instagram and Facebook at FitLivin, FITTLIVIN. That's where you're going to see where I deliver all of what I'm doing and what's going on, and some of my different content, educational bits with fitness, food, and faith.
Awesome. And we will link up to that and all the other things that you mentioned on the show notes page for our listeners to check out.
Excellent.
Well, before I let you go, as I always end the podcast with, my thesis behind the wellness paradox is that paradox is the gap in trust, communication, and interaction that exists between fitness professionals and medical professionals. And I always love to get everyone's thoughts on what is the one piece of advice you would give fitness professionals to start to close off that gap.
This is a great question. I hope you're recording. I was going to write a book one day on everybody's viewpoints.
I am. You said it.
Yes. Yay. I think the best thing that we can do is to embrace humility. God gave all of us specialties, and all of our goodness, all of the gifts that we have were meant to work cohesively together, right? There's no winner. There was no one person who won the prize, right? Jesus Christ already declared us all victorious, but we got all of these tools so that we can contribute equally. And I think just being humble and being able to recognize the gifts in others that can help the world, and allowing them to use them as they equally allow you to use yours, and just being humble in that process.
Well said. Rosi Reeves, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Rosi as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a massive difference for us. Any additional information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 54. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platforms. Until we chat again next week, please be well.